Okay, so we'll get started. But, I wrote down something really interesting, and I think this gets to the whole basis of our problem here. But anyway, the name of the topic here is Spiritual Answer to My Food Addiction. But listen to this. The eating disorder wrongly becomes a person's identity it has taken over. Isn't that true with all of these obsessions and problems we have in life, and especially we're talking here about food or addictions? It becomes all about our compulsive nature, whether restricting or overeating or whatever we're doing with the food or with anything else in our lives. It becomes who we are. Our whole life becomes that addiction, whether it could be, success, money, things like that. But we have an answer. We have a solution, because before, everything we tried didn't work. Why? Because everything we did as far as the dieting, trying to control it, came from the self again. Again, we were obsessing about the obsession and making a big part of us. And we wonder why all these years it hasn't worked, and 95% of diets fail, and 95% of this in life. And again, it's related to everything in our lives. So the perception change had to be different. That's different. That's where spirituality comes in. A spiritual understanding, listen to this, replaces the compulsion of eating disorder or addiction. It's the perception change. And what is the whole problem with our addiction? Has to do with the self, the ego. The self saying, I know how to resolve the issues in life by getting more of this, more of that, and through the intellect. So we go back to the intellect, and the ego in our intelligence try to learn more. Again, I had shelves full of self-help books, diet books, whatever it was. I went to 100 people to ask them how to resolve this problem. But what? We used it from the self. And we said here the self is the problem. The self-made food are central, or addictions, or addiction to people, whatever it is, the central part of our lives. So the only answer is, and we know about that from all of these meetings in the 12-step programs, is a spiritual solution. And what is a spiritual solution? And it says here, the eating disorder became a higher power. The addiction to food, the addiction to people, whatever it was. So the more we defined it, the more we, I always say this too, when we go to meetings, call you up, they complain about their problems. The problem we know about is by complaining, we make it more real. And I always say the answer to all my problems is to realize I have no problems. The answer to my food addictions and problems with my compulsions, drug or alcohol addictions, is to realize I don't really have the addiction. What I mean by that is our basic knowledge. Listen to this. When we get centered and we get out of our thinking and obsessing about all of these different things, and we have our thinking on a different plane, again, the intellect keeps on bringing us back. How many times have I gone to meetings with addiction type meetings, and for some reason I felt more like wanting to be into the addiction because it was defining the situation. It kept on reinforcing it. Went to a meeting, complained about somebody in my life or somebody at work. It became more reinforced. The resentment got larger and bigger. So there's one answer, and there's an answer, and it's called being in the spirituality. When we're spiritual, our body will know the answer. The signals from the stomach, which we, by self-centered fear, it's the recrimination, it's the guilt, the shame, when we think we're putting ourselves down, right? Because we're into trying to figure out the problem. And then when we don't figure it out, when we don't adhere to the strict way we have it written on paper, say we have a program of what we should do, then we get back, and the ego says, no, you did wrong. And then we want to resolve that by getting back into our addictions because we're into the self-centered fear. So the guilt, the shame, the remorse, all of these things. But we have a better way. It's called getting out of the self, losing the self to find the selves. Forgetting what the eyes see, or you ever hear that, or the ears hear. It's being in what's called the fourth dimension, another way of existence, which is called spirituality. But the whole thing is this, look, people say, what is this all about, spirituality? We were meant to be spiritual people in a human experience, not human in spiritual the other way around. We were meant, and the way we know that is, again, I always reference to when we're younger children, they're always happy, they go out and play and be in the present. But we took it upon ourselves with this God-given intellect. God gave us this, in certain situations, again, to figure out how to get on a Zoom meeting or something like that. But we use it for the way every reaction in our lives is coming from the self. The self, the ego, will steer us wrong all the time. So the solution to this problem is, and I have some more things written down. So first of all, the inner critic gets activated, meaning that the ego starts saying, you're not doing this right, you're never going to resolve this issue the rest of your life, and the obsession comes in, the compulsion comes in more, and the more we resist it, the more problem we have. So we have years of this, years of dieting and self-recrimination. In other words, we went and we tried to, even like when I read self-help books, I spoke to professionals how to figure this whole situation out. I was defining the situation. And a lot of times these people would come back to me and they have like 10 different disorders that I had. And when I look on the internet and they tell me about all these disorders, some people say you could have attention deficit disorder, whatever it is, all these different things, compulsions and obsessions. And you want to know something? When I think about it and the ego gets involved, the ego's going to say, just like I said here with our addictions, it's going to say, Bob, look, you can't think. 1 minute you're thinking one thing and next minute you're thinking another. So you have this disease. Or else when I go to work and I get upset with everybody there because of the way they acted. By the way, last meeting, maybe we'll have time to read the sick man prayer and discuss it a little bit today. But it's the ego, it's the self. Selfishness, self-centeredness coming from the self. So the way out of this whole thing is having a spirituality. Then everything around us becomes one. We can feel our body, right? Get centered, prayer, meditation, whatever it is. And then we can feel the signals from our stomach. Do you realize we're cutting it off every time we try to control this? Because controlling it says, listen, if you want to be happy and free, you got to do what they were telling you to do. That's not the way it is. We have this God conscious rising above our problems. I have some other things written down. Let me see what I have here. The diet, weight, measurement, trying to figure it out does not solve our thinking problem. We had to realize, look, our best thinking got us here. And we always have to ask ourselves, how's it working out for you up to now? And listen, when I came into these 12-step programs, it wasn't working out. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was into a few different addictions, alcohol, drugs, food, whatever it was. I was addicted to people. If people looked at me the wrong way, I got upset. It's all the same thing. It's getting out of self, rising to that higher consciousness, spirituality, not coming from the material. Our think is material, The whole world, it's called the low-hanging fruit. And especially now with the corporations with the food. But with anything in life, it's called the low-hanging fruit. You figure you go out and you see, life and everything. You figure that's the answer, the pleasure you come from it, that momentary pleasure. And that's what we do from the five senses. And, that's where actually in religions they talk about, actually in the 12-step programs they talk about the seven deadly sins, right? Pride being the main one. Pride, right? So pride is the main one. And then gluttony, of course, dealing with gluttony. It's all the ego, lust, envy, all of these things are created by ourself, our intellect. We got to figure it all out. And if we're, I always talk about self-esteem and saying that people say I got to build that up, but it's sort of saying that it's an interesting thing because it's saying if I can dress better, look better, act better, make more money, or be more successful than somebody, I'll have more self-esteem. So we're coming from this whole way of thinking from the self, the spirituality and this higher consciousness. And this thing gets us out of it. And it's directly related to our food addiction. Actually, the other way, as I said, makes it worse. It makes it worse. And we're so miserable. It's called being a dry drunk or dry food addict or whatever it is.